National Party claim about getting back on track. So, what's going to be the commitment to national rail networks again, having sold them off under the previous Liberal administration?
Right, we'll just keep things fair. So the question is, what is the commitment to national rail networks? And we're going to start with Jessica.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I like trains as much as the next sort of public transport, but basically I think that trains, where they make sense, where there's a business case that supports them, then absolutely let's do them, let's subsidise them, because public transport really works. Trains aren't good for every situation because they're really expensive. And there are a lot of places where more buses or a dedicated busway does as good a job for a tiny fraction of the price. So yeah, trains, great, absolutely, where there's enough patronage to make it make sense for the cost, and also for the amount of concrete you need to put one in place, because there are some rail projects that are being proposed at the moment that are going to take like decades, like many decades, before they even start giving us any carbon benefits because they're so carbon intensive to build. So I'm not at all ideological about this stuff. If the business cases stack up, including the climate impacts, absolutely, let's go for it.
Thanks, Jessica. Greg.
Yes, look, committed to rail. It is going to be part of our future, and keeping it as part of our future. This is the one frustrating thing about having waxed and waned between governments, and it's not just been government decisions too. I mean, heck, I grew up on the West Coast where the Denniston Incline was stopped because of local interests down there, because on the council, the local trucking firm and the local bus firm that were going to get all the ability to, all the money for bringing the miners up and down, the coal up and down. So that sort of thinking we've actually got to commit to actually rail, because that's going to be the future of this country. We're a long, thin country that actually in many ways lends itself to rail for that very reason. We've got the Cook Strait, which of course does complicate things in New Zealand, but we're a country that lends itself to rail. Let's commit to it.
Thanks, Greg. Nicola,
look, there will continue to be a really important place for rail, both for passengers and for freight. From a passenger perspective, obviously the Johnsonville line, the Kapiti line, the Wairarapa line are very important to Wellington. The last national government was involved in upgrades to our rail lines. In fact, we kicked off the building of the City Rail Loop in Auckland because we saw that rail was a good option for the CBD. When it comes to freight, I think someone possibly pejoratively referred to me having worked at Fonterra. Look, when I worked at Fonterra, I saw what a critical role rail played in terms of getting our commodity milk products both from farmers to processing, but also from processing to port. So rail does have an important role, but Jessica makes a good point. We do need to look at each individual business case to make sure it stacks up, and you can expect us to have that kind of discipline.
Great, thanks, Nicola. Martin.
Yes, we totally support rail. However, we know that rail doesn't make money from a business point of view, but we have to look at the bigger picture in terms of, holistically, in terms of saving on the roads, the less cost to the road of trucks travelling up and down the roads. Totally supportive of a proper rail network. It reminds me of a story when I lived in Sydney. They had a rail strike, State Rail Authority had a strike, and for one day. And it was the first time in 40 years they made a profit of $4 million.
Thanks, Martin.
So yeah, Green Party policy, we love rail. Light rail in Auckland and Wellington, and rapid passenger rail and freight through our major cities and in the regions as well. Because it makes sense, right? Let's not have trucks going up and down State Highway 1. Let's get all of that onto rails. Let's make it easier for people to travel without having to fly. And I personally have done the Auckland to Wellington train trip a couple of times. It's lovely, but my God, it takes so long.
And it's expensive.
And it's very expensive. So what are you getting? You're getting a lovely train trip. So absolutely, Greens, big on rail, big on getting trucks and cars off the roads, which then also reduces the cost of maintaining those roads and actually frees up congestion for all of those who want to stay driving.
Thank you.
It seems to be fairly clear from what I've heard tonight that we need to have more scientists, more engineers and more medical people. For people in this country to get trained at university in those top subjects costs an arm and a leg. You come through your university and you've got to owing anything up to $80,000. In the past, university was free, but you had to reach a certain academic standard before you could go. And I would like to see the same thing happening again. That we have free university, a student can go to university, and they can study if they reach the right academic level. They can study things that they need to do work, but also they can study things that they don't necessarily need because there doesn't appear to be any reason for it. But in 10 years' time, those subjects may suddenly turn out to be most important. I would like to ask you, what do you intend to do with university fees?
I'm going to be honest, I am checking the manifesto because I don't want to just make stuff up. The Green Party would move towards fees free for all tertiary courses and also expand apprenticeships. Obviously, tertiary education is vitally important, and speaking as someone with a Bachelor of Arts in English, all learning is actually good learning. We need that skilled learning, but we also need people to have the diversity of learning, because if someone just goes in and all they do is an engineering degree, that's awesome, but do they understand the society and the culture that those engineering projects have to be delivered in? So actually having a broadly educated population is just generally a good thing. So let's do that. We would also address student hardship through things like our income guarantee. It would mean that people aren't trying to get those really technical degrees with the 6 a.m. labs every morning. That's why I did a Bachelor of Arts, no labs. Without also trying to work 2 jobs just to pay the rent. So we need a really comprehensive look at how we make things easier for people to get those degrees that we need to have a better society.
Thanks, Stephanie. Nicola.
Well, it's our policy to keep funding interest-free student loans as well as first-year fees free. But we acknowledge that there is also a lot of funding that goes into the tertiary system on top of that. So everyone who studies at university, between 2/3 and 3/4 of their study is paid for by the taxpayer. And so we think it's important that we recognise that there are other valid ways of training and learning that don't require university, whether it's trades training and apprenticeships or jobs-based learning. And we think that system is also important. When it comes to what is the major barrier to people attending university today, actually, it's that far too many people are leaving school without the ability to read, write, and do maths at the basic level needed to enter tertiary education. And so that's the problem we actually as a country have to confront. It's particularly driving inequality, because we're seeing students from lower socioeconomic communities are really missing out on those skills, and that's why we're very focused on lifting achievement in schools.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah, in the past, remember, you didn't have to have UE if you were 21. Anyone could go to university after that too, so there wasn't always that qualification anyway. First year fees free, I know something that was Grant Robertson was his baby. He'd been grown up with a solo parent in Dunedin, and he knew what a barrier it was for him, and so he was very proud. It was one of the first things he did as Minister of Finance to bring that in and committed to it. But don't forget, that's not only for university, that's also for trades training as well, and our apprentices. So it's getting the right people in the right place. I think I was probably the generation after me were the ones who you had to go to university, you had to get a degree without any real understanding of how that degree might work. So I think there is the opportunity for a smarter use of our universities. Obviously, our universities, many of them are in trouble. Ironically, the only one that isn't is Canterbury, because they had to reform themselves after the Christchurch earthquake when they didn't have any students. So there's going to be some reform needed in the university sector.
Thanks, Greg. Jessica.
So, thank you for your question, Bruce. I think we can acknowledge that for a lot of university courses of study, there is public benefit and there's private benefit from that study. So I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable for people to pay for some of their tertiary education depending on what they're studying. I paid for mine, I'm 40, how old am I? 44. I think I paid off my student loan about 3 years ago. So like I feel the pain, particularly of the people here who had to not only pay for their fees, they had to pay interest while they were studying. But for us, our bigger focus is, as Stephanie said, for the real barrier for people studying is actually the cost of living. Is while they're studying, they can't afford to like stop working. So that's why we want to have a universal basic income, not just for students but for everybody. When you have a universal basic income, you get a guaranteed amount of money from the government, and when you work, you don't lose it. So it's actually a really great incentive to work. When you're a student, it might be working part-time. When you're not studying, you might work more than that. So that's really a bigger focus for us. Not top policy, but I would say some courses like social work, where we have a real shortage, and they get paid bugger all for doing really vital work. I would like that sort of course of study to be fees-free.
Thanks, Jessica. And Mark.
Yes, we'd further continue on to support the student loans scheme, enhance that, but a particular policy that we do have is to provide electricity coupons for students to help them at that time, and also look for some other ways we could provide for the cost of living during the study, without the input details on that, but we're definitely looking in that direction.
Thanks, Martin. Great. Next question.